Hi. So we did our lesson plan on the effects of smoking on the respiratory system, and we said that it was for high school. We weren't able to determine which grade level, but we're thinking maybe like a bio or anatomy class. So first, the essential literacy strategy focus. Students will be able to develop models, which is something they'll be doing in this activity. They're going to explain the roles of the different physiological structures and their function within the human body, something that they should have already done in previous activities, and synthesize an explanation using various sources of information about how the environment can affect different structures in the human body, which is kind of what we're doing in this lesson. But the essential literacy strategy focus is kind of more broad. It has to do with this lesson, but also all the other lessons. And some of these related skills that support the use of the strategy include describing the structure and function of the respiratory system, comparing the different effects of cigarette smoke on the respiratory system. And these are things that the activity does. So the content focus really in this lesson is on respiratory system structure and function and the effects of cigarette smoke on this. So we decided to use high school standards, life science standards, and here we include, and it's mostly about developing and using a model, which is something the students will be doing. And here we included our ELA standards. So the instructional learning objectives, these are some things that students should be able to do as a result of this lesson. They'll be able to identify and explain the effects of cigarette smoke on the respiratory system. This is going to be measured by a formative assessment. They're going to submit a brochure at the end of class. And then there's an informal assessment. Teachers walks around during group discussion. The next one is that students will be able to recognize and describe the anatomy of the respiratory system. This is going to be measured by a formative assessment, the brochure announcement assignment again. And then informally, students will kind of share out loud in pairs, and the teacher will kind of walk around and check for understanding. They'll be able to analyze data from real-world test results and justify the correlation between the data and effects of smoking on the respiratory system. This is a formative assessment that'll be measured by, they'll be given data and they'll be asked to analyze it, and the teacher will kind of be able to see this. And then they'll be able to model the respiratory system, and the teacher will be able to see this in their brochures. So the language functions are very similar to the learning objectives. They're kind of just worded differently. And then we have the vocabulary and the discourse. So originally we weren't very specific about it, but the veteran 3SB person told us to kind of specify. We had written active learning discussion, but she told us to kind of specify what they'll be discussing. So they'll be actively participating in speaking, communicating ideas and explanations about the respiratory system, and they'll be writing about the effects of cigarette smoke on the respiratory system. And they'll also be actively listening to the teacher and the ideas of other students. So here we have our resources and materials that we used, and the student prior knowledge. We weren't sure what the previous activity was since this is just one lesson, but we just kind of assumed that students would know the structure and function of the respiratory system before coming to this lesson. So the transition from the previous activity was just a recap, a really brief 1-minute recap of what they had learned previously, and then kind of tying it in to what they're learning today by kind of showing a video that tours the different parts of the body or the respiratory system, and then the teacher goes into focused instruction, which is modeling. This is mostly the teacher talking. Teacher passes out the materials, goes over the models of the different parts of the functions of the respiratory system, kind of shows the students a picture of a comparison of a healthy lung and a diseased lung, and this kind of opens up the conversation for this topic. For the scaffolds, the teacher uses a lot of gestures to emphasize ideas and concepts. The teacher speaks clearly, and one thing that we should have probably done is maybe specify scaffolds and differentiation for each group. So for ELLs, IEP students with IEPs, struggling readers, underperforming students, all of them, instead of just kind of generalizing it. For guided instruction, here we have the students actually doing the activity. They're breathing through 2 different straws. It's a very brief activity, but they're breathing through 2 different straws, and the teacher's walking around answering questions. They're doing pair shares. It's very guided. And then here we have the independent practice, where they're working on a virtual lab activity, and this is independent. And then at the end, they're doing a trifold brochure on what they just learned. And this is the differentiation. There's a lot of modeling, there's a lot of pictures, visuals for students with IEPs, ELLs. And then we have the closure. So the teacher kind of brings the class together and shows a video about an activity that we couldn't really do. It's because it involves actual cigarettes and like a lighter. So the teacher is just going to show a video of it and kind of show the material and lay it out beforehand, so students can just kind of see it on their way out of class. They kind of just close up the the discussion, and then pose a question that prompts students to reflect on the purpose of the respiratory system and the ill effects that smoking has on the respiratory system. And then depending on what the next lesson will be, the teacher will kind of just tie it in with that. So thank you.